All right. Hello, everyone. It's the second time around. I think it's. I'm really grateful for those of you who have joined. Not that many for the second iteration, but I'm really. It's really helpful for me because that means that I have a little bit more energy and it's much more fun to talk to somebody than just talking to yourself in the room I'm constantly in. I started recording. As most of you know that are watching this video, probably I forgot to record the first session, so this is the second session. I think at the end in the queue you have a chance for asking questions about the coursework. I try to remember some of the questions and maybe I can integrate them into this recording as well. But let me start by sharing some of the slides that I have prepared. Oops, that's not share. All right. And then use the reminder for myself to start recording. Okay. So we want to talk about coursework in the next 30 minutes, and then we have a quick Q&A. And the intent of the session is to give you a feeling for what the coursework is about, but I also want to kind of share a little bit the insights that I gathered over the last years about what students commonly struggle with and how to overcome that. We will continue to work on this also in the seminars. I think this coursework in particular, or this group work will last week and this week, we will always and continue to do so, focus in our group work on the coursework so that you get more information, more insights on how to kind of overcome some of the problems that I see. But in this session, I want to basically share all the big problems that I know and to kind of help you to overcome these obstacles and get a good mark. So let's get the formalities out of the way and talk a little bit about what you have to do. So, Uppsala, just like, I'm not sure. So if you go to Moodle, there's a section that's called Coursework, Everything You Need to Know, okay? You will find this recording, you will find the slides in there as well as under this week's heading. But here you also can see a super short summary of what you're supposed to do, right? And it's like you're asked to write one piece of coursework, a 2,000-word report. You find all the scenarios in the document called Assessment Template Coursework on Friday, March the 4th. So at this Friday at midnight, I will release, or probably a little bit earlier, hopefully a little bit earlier than midnight, we'll release the scenarios for these reports. And I show you in a second some of the examples that kind of to give you a bit of a flavor. But if you come to the seminars so far, you know already some of the coursework scenarios we used last year. So this should not come as a surprise to you. And then you have basically, I think, about 2 months' time to finish your coursework. You can see here on the 26th of April, this is the deadline to submit your coursework. And by now you know the drill, how to submit it and so forth. Here in the assessment template is a lot of things I say today kind of written again there. You know that from all of your other modules. This is where you will find the scenarios. If you click on it right now, there you have the full template, but not the scenarios yet, but you find also additional information about formatting, about tips and tricks, how to write and so forth. All or most of them I will share today as well. But I always think it's really good to kind of look at this document as well. And you should do it when you read the scenarios on Friday or whenever you choose start working on it. The assessment criteria, this is like something that's also kind of worthwhile looking at on Moodle. I will talk about this obviously today as well, but this should give you a feeling for if you want to, for instance, get a first. And I think everyone listening, seeing this video, you should try to get a first. You have the capabilities to get a first. So why not try to do that? You will see this is the standard assessment criteria we use for reports. And it's good to kind of get to know them because this will apply to coursework in your third year, to other areas as well. But I will talk about this in a second. Okay. Underneath, you also find an APA formatted sample paragraph that will be familiar for most of you guys if you come to the seminars, because we used them for some of the group works. And so you're kind of familiar for how your document should look like, but that would be something to use as a guideline as well and might be helpful. Okay. So last year, the coursework was slightly different. Students had to write 2 reports, one in the middle of the seminar, so in the middle of the semester, that is basically now they would have to start writing, and then one at the end of the semester. Now we only have one at the end of the semester. This is the scenario most of you will be familiar by now, but let me read it out. Biddy University asks you to help because they're concerned about the impact first impressions might make on their hiring decisions. In particular, they feel that the decisions people make on hiring committees might be influenced by the pictures of the applicants that are attached to the applications. Now they want to know from you what kind of impressions people form when seeing a photo of another person, which factors influence those impressions, and if the impressions are reliable. Finally, would you recommend removing the pictures from the applications, sorry. Okay, so this is kind of like easy, I think, to identify. This is a topic that centers about research that we had in week 3 on person perception, and we had, like last week, we read good, not so good, and not so good examples of answers students provided last year. But this year there will be an addition, right? This is, you will, in each scenario will be focused not only on one lecture, but on 2 lectures, one from the first half, one from the second half. So an addition could be, if we would use, obviously we don't use this scenario, but if you would use a scenario like this, then the sections in red could be the additions, right? It could be, furthermore, Biddy University also fears that an unconscious bias, something they read in the press about, might impact hiring decisions. We will talk about the so-called unconscious bias, which is obviously not unconscious, what you will learn about, or as you will learn in 2 weeks after the reading week. But we will talk about this, and so there would be another lecture on the topic of that, right? And then you would have also an application, the reflection on the other lecture, and if first impressions might be influenced by unconscious attitudes people have towards others. Finally, what could the university do to make the hiring process fairer? Okay, so you will get one problem, and you will ask to use the content mainly of 2 weeks of like topics to give and provide help and solutions to these problems and outline the research within there. Okay. These are the marking criteria. I think by now you're probably familiar with them. I think for me, it's just like important to highlight, you basically, there's knowledge and understanding, right, is the most important one. And this is the least important one, okay? There's very little reason not to do appropriate referencing and to have APA formatting. It will take you a minute or so. But it's like, if your content is good, if you demonstrate a really strong foundational knowledge and understanding, then this is kind of like much more important than whether you have not appropriate references, but if your referencing follows APA style. Okay, so the foundation for everything that you do is that you demonstrate really good knowledge and understanding, that you know the theories that apply, the most important ones, how they apply to your problem, thereby demonstrating understanding. Analysis, synthesis, evidence, structure, logic, clarity, and argument are things that then on top come, right? They're also more important than APA referencing. But here we ask, okay, what do you make out of contradictions? What do you make of kind of like critically reflecting on the content, etc.? You will how do you connect the content with each other, right? What are your conclusions, right? At the end of the, do you, for instance, in the Biddy University, what are your conclusions? What should they do? Should they leave the picture on there or not, and why? Right? So they're a little bit harder to kind of explain, but this is things you should be familiar, hopefully by now, on how to write and how to do. I will talk a little bit about in the upcoming slides, how you can make sure that you do address all of these points, okay? Just like one thing, strangely, I get the most questions each year about the word count. It's in in all of the assessment templates, but I get the most questions about it. It's like, how much is the word count? The word count is 2,000. You can have it. You have a 10% allowance, so you can go to 2,200 words. I don't think that longer is better. I really strongly recommend against adding things to get to the 2000. Writing about irrelevant stuff or things that are not quite right or things that you feel common sense would suggest we could do also makes your report worse rather than better. So this is an upper limit, and you should not write more than 2,200 words, because Yasmin, Connie, and I, when we mark your coursework, we will just stop reading after 2,200 words, okay? So it's really important not to go over. There's no penalty if you write 1,500 and you have everything we are looking for in there. It's perfectly fine. It's just harder to do. It's not a lot of words, right? And to kind of, I would encourage you to take advantage of these words, but there's no additional bonus for writing more than less, okay? It's all about whether the stuff you write about is relevant or not, and including irrelevant research, which a lot of students, as we kind of talked in the last 2 weeks about, like to do, is worse than not having that research in there, okay? The references do not count at the end to your word count. In-text references count, obviously. So the references, after you have written your report, there will be a section references, and you have all your references underneath. They do not count for your word count, but the research you cite within your paragraphs, these references count. The scenario doesn't count either. I think that's obvious, but I would encourage you to put the scenario into your coursework, because sometimes I had trouble in the past identifying which scenario the student is talking about. And I think it makes it easier if you just put the scenario in, or at least an indication about what you are writing. Okay, so let's talk about greatness. Let's talk about what you have to do for a great mark, okay? And as I said before, I think all of you should try to get a first. I think there's nothing, I mean, at least from my perspective, there's no reason why you couldn't, right? If you follow these steps outlined, if you come to the lectures, if you come to the seminars, and you just apply and do what we tell you to do, you will be fine, okay? So this is the distribution of the first coursework, the marks of the first coursework last year. You can see, like, this is 40, so you failed, underneath you failed, 90, nobody got 90. It's a really nice normal distribution. So this is like, I think I marked basically I marked half of them. Doesn't really matter, but me and Yasmin marked them. We did, I think, if I may say so, we did a really good job here. You can see it's almost normally distributed. Most students, as you can see, about 60 got a 62. So a 2-2, and then you have about another 60 who got a 2-1. And then you have about 30 that got a 72, and then very few people got something higher than a 72, and I think we have 180. And then you see also similar distributions on the other side. So about 40, 60 students got like a third or lower, okay? So this is kind of like to just give you a little bit of a feeling for what to expect. I hope by every year, I hope like this year we will be better. I'm trying to do as much as I can to push the distribution towards a better, but that kind of brings us a little bit to the biggest problem students have, or like basically trying to overcome. First, before we talk about this, I just want to kind of tell you a little bit about what I think you should do when you approach this coursework. What I think, once you see these scenarios and you're starting about writing about them, what should you do? I think the obvious first step is to identify the right topics, okay? So what do I mean by that, right? If you have the Biddy University case and you would start writing over reading week on these cases, there's like, oh, we already had person perception, okay? So let me look into that week and the content that is provided in that week. The second thing you should do then, if you identify person perception as the relevant topic for your, is to go through the lecture materials, obviously including the additional videos, and see what is relevant for your coursework, right? So you should basically go through slide to slide, re-listen to, if you can stand it, to my descriptions, look at your notes and say like, okay, is this relevant? Is this not relevant? Relevant, not relevant, relevant, not relevant. That will help you to accumulate quite a bit of research and like the important things you should talk about in your coursework, right? Next step, write the sections up, right? Sounds stupid, but it's like, before you do anything else, before you look into additional research, into the articles, etc., the things I say next time, you should write whatever you have up in these lectures. This should be the meat of your coursework, like the most of your coursework, basically, like 60% of your writing should come, roughly, obviously, but 60% roughly should come from the lectures that I gave you, right? I selected for each of these topics the most important, central, interesting ideas within that field, and they need to be in there, right? I say that, and I foreshadow a little bit one of the biggest problems. That is probably the biggest problem, that students do not do that. The second biggest problems is the applications. So, and I have here, think of Darth Vader. We would talk about Darth Vader. We would talk about how to make your applications better. That's the second biggest problem. Okay, so write the applications, the sections up, and make applications. Can you actually translate the content you have to the problem? If you can't, then maybe you should delete the research and write about something else instead, because that might suggest that your research is not relevant. Okay. Thereafter, you should go through the chapter. There's always a textbook chapter linked, but more importantly, go to the articles of the week. There's an article each week. Look at that. That should be your next step to look. It's like, okay, what else can I learn from the like things Andreas provided us with, right? This will basically bring you up to 90% of every content you need. If you have done that, and for these two topics, there's very little you need to do. We will talk about a little next, but this is just to remind you, this is where the key content of your coursework should come from the lectures, the additional videos, and the reading that I provide, okay? And we do this in this week as our group work in the seminars, right? We talk about like find additional research, okay? Often students think like, okay, this is, if you, I think I forgot to highlight that, but if you look at the marking criteria, it's like, okay, if you want to have a first, you need to have some kind of additional research, some kind of independent piece of information that you put in there that I did not provide you with in during the lectures, okay? We will focus our whole like group work in the seminars on this specific topic, but this is maybe the last 10% of your content, okay? Yeah, so once you have all the content, you should go through all the paragraphs and group things that are common and delete all the stuff that's not relevant, right? There's another, like in a lot of writing, the problem is that there's a lot of repetition, that students basically rewrite the same thing. There's one study by Ash that shows, for instance, as an example, there's one study by Ash that shows that warmth is more important than competence. And then in the next paragraph, it's like, oh, by the way, research by Rosenberg shows that warmth is more important than competence. And then they mention it again. It's like, put that all in one paragraph, okay? And that's it. You made one point, you don't have to repeat yourself, okay? But you can only do this once all the content is on the table, right? At this point, your report might be longer than 2,000 words. That means, oh, I need to cut something. Where do I repeat myself, Okay. Repetition is not good. Try to get rid of repetition. That makes me wonder if you actually understand. She's just said that and now she's saying it again. Does she understand that these are the same things? Okay. So make sure to only include relevant and research, and also things that do not repeat themselves. Okay. Um, and then form connections between paragraphs. We talk about these like other steps like structure. This is like step 6 is really about structure. Like if you want to have a first day, you can't repeat yourself, or you can't highlight that certain things have other things in common with them, right? So if you talked about warmth and competence in one study, and then in the next paragraph you talk about warmth and competence again, as if you didn't just talk about it, that will not give you the first, right? Because I feel like, I don't know, the student doesn't see any connections between the content they are talking about. They might not realize that this is basically the same idea, just slightly differently expressed, and that's important to be aware of. Okay, so get rid of repetitions and highlight contradictions. Sometimes research contradicts itself, right? Some researchers don't. There's no need to kind of neglect that. There's no need to smoothen that out. Just like, but you have to acknowledge it, right? You can say something, oh, in contrast to what I just told you, here's another line of research that argues something differently, right? And that's really important to highlight, that you kind of understand this as key part of this like that you understand these connections and contradictions and so forth. Okay. The last thing that I would say is, like, I think it would be really just in order what I would, these are the steps I think you should do. And I think it's super important to get feedback. There's nothing of importance that I submit, that I publish, that has not at least be written by, read by 2 other people. Okay, it's really important that you try to get feedback. Ideally, you could find somebody within the course that did a different scenario. There will be 3 scenarios. If you two take 2 different scenarios, then you can exchange yours and critique each other, highlight problems, highlight repetitions, read it. Other students are very, very harsh critics. So it's really good. And it's always much, much easier to critique something, to give feedback something, then do it, right? You can see it in sport. It's easy to tell that a football player should have scored the goal. It's very hard to do it yourself. Writing is the same thing. It's easy to tell that there's something off, but it's really hard to do it better. So get feedback and then put it in whatever your parent, your sibling, another student tells you. If they can't understand the paragraph, then you did not do a good job in describing it, and you need to edit this. Okay, so these are basically the 8 steps I would recommend for getting a good mark. And I think if you just follow them one by one, you'll get a first, I am pretty sure. If you're right, I think you by now know how to write a paragraph. This is just something I think adapted a little bit to our context, right? This is, if you think about the paragraph as like the key unit that makes up your report, then I think each paragraph should start with a short sentence that summarizes the content, right? This gives the reader an idea, oh, now we're talking about that. This is also the place where you should form connections to what you already said. You could say, additionally, other research suggests this and this, or and so forth. Okay, so here's an example how I would start like one paragraph on social isolation and misery of commute. Is like, one reason why people on the London Overground might experience so little joy during their commute is that they do not interact with other people. Oh, okay. So the thesis of this paragraph is that not interacting with other people makes one miserable. So now I would suggest that you present about the guideline always says 3 pieces of evidence, but I think now you present your evidence, okay, to support your first sentence. Why is that so, right? Humans are inherently social species. Aha, so they need it. Here's another study. Here's another study. Okay. Good, right? And then at the end, I would really strongly suggest that you always have thereafter, if it's in the same paragraph or in an immediately subsequent paragraph, to do the application. Some students say, oh, you know what? I first write up all the content and then I write about the applications. And when they do the applications, they forget about half of their content. So they have a good kind of relevant content, but they simply forget to apply it. And that's not good. That's like a key aspect of our coursework, right? That you have good applications of your topics, okay? So, and so you can kind of like bring it into the context and see like, okay, here's like, instead of talking to each other, what people do on Overground is this and that. And this is what we suggest they should do instead. So always have a paragraph and thereafter have the application. Make sure, we talk about this in a second, a little bit more detail, that all the content in your paragraph is translated into the application. I always suggest that you start with the second step and finish with the first step. So first you kind of write about the research and it's like, oh, what am I actually talking about in this paragraph? If you can't summarize the paragraph with one sentence, then you have too many topics going on and you should split up your paragraph into several paragraphs and or group them with other topics. Okay, if you can't find a summary sentence of your paragraph, it's not a good paragraph. That's a good key indicator. And then finish. So it's a good thing to finish with that. And if you struggle, and it's like, okay, I need to kind of change something about this paragraph. I'm saying this, and I say it again, and I think I'll repeat this several times. If you don't follow this formula, you can still get a good mark, right? It's just much harder. And I think I would just use this formula to guide you towards good writing, towards clear writing, towards, and all of this applies to any type of writing you will do in the next 20 years, right? Whether you write applications, you should follow this principle. Whether you write your coursework, whether you write your third-year dissertation, all of these principles are the same. That being said, content is king. If your like whole essay is just one long paragraph, the person who marks your essay will curse you, they will be mad, but you would still get a good mark, right? If the content is great, then the rest doesn't matter that much. But it's just often following these formal layouts and these recommendations helps you to get good content, right? You can make it easy on yourself or you can make it hard on yourself. And we suggest that following the guidelines for how to write a paragraph and how to structure your essay will help you to more easily to achieve great content. Okay? But I just don't want, like, you will not be marked whether you follow each and every paragraph of this follows this exact structure, but I would strongly recommend you do this. Biggest problems, the three biggest problems that I see each year in the coursework in social psychology. The by far biggest problem is the reinvention of the wheel. And so what do I mean by that? I think what I said in the first step, go into our first, second, I can't quite remember the numbers, but go into the lectures, go into the additional videos, go into the article of the week, go into the textbook chapters. This is where your content is. Okay, but what many students do, and maybe because they just do it on the night before, it's like, oh, I need to quickly find something. I can't be bothered with actually looking at lectures. It's like they go to obscure, strange, non-peer reviewed sources, simply psychology, Psychology Today, and all this other nonsense. These places might have good content, or they might have really bad content. They might give you really good ideas about what the content is about, what the topic is about, or they might be completely wrong. Some people sometimes use like their A-level textbook for social psychology. There's so many mistakes in these textbooks. These are for A-level students written by teachers. I don't want to say anything bad about teachers, but I think you get the sense this is not a peer-reviewed source. Everyone who writes at Simply Psychology can write whatever they want to, okay? So this is like, yeah, last year, kind of a lot of students used this article, for instance, for writing about Bit University. And it's like, why are they talking about these irrelevant topics? And it's like, oh, if you Google first impressions on faces or something like that, that's the first thing you get, okay? So there was a lot of content where it was kind of like, this is not really important. Why are they talking about it? Because it was in the first article about it. You can see it for those who actually cite their sources, right? You can see here, this is my marking. I'm not sure why the screenshot on top is kind of grainy. It's like inappropriate reference, inappropriate reference, inappropriate reference, inappropriate reference. So here's like, I don't know, 11 scientific reasons why attractive people are more successful in life from Business Insider. Okay. Here's something from next.com. I'm not familiar with that. This is like Psychology Today and Pocket Pens. All of these sources, I think I have another, right? All of them are nonsense. They're not, this is not sources you should use, and they might really lead you astray. First, go into the lectures, right? Here's another one. It's like, okay, very well mined is an inappropriate reference, okay? Psych Central, whatever that is. And here's like something from Britannica, okay? This is actually not that bad because I think the student used to define what we talk about when we talk about schema. First impressions from Psychology Today. What do people really think when they see your profile picture? Psychology Today, and so forth, right? And in some sense, I think the key essence would still be, I mean, this is like content is king. You might, despite having all these nonsense like sources, get really good content. That is rarely the case because rarely these people understand the science. They just write about whatever is kind of clickbaity and gets you to get on their content, okay? One thing that last year happened is like that one of the first or second sources they found on Psychology Today on first impressions was this by Satoshi Kanasawa. Satoshi Kanasawa is a highly controversial researcher at the London School of Economics, who's kind of protected by his academic freedom. I think it's fair to say he has really strong racist tendencies, and he has a very kind of like outsider position. I think Psychology Today probably employs him because he's very clickbaity, right? And so I reached through these articles where the criminals look different from non-criminals, right? Yes, you should judge a book by its cover. And I was like, this runs counter to everything I was teaching. Where is that nonsense coming from? Thank God Turnitin tells me where it's coming from. And then I end up with this, right? And so this is like a person who is a PhD, like I think he's not even a psychologist, or he's an evolutionary psychologist or something along those lines. But he just writes about his own personal opinions about this, on his take on the research, which are not correct and which no other researcher approved of, okay? So if you do if you start writing about it, please avoid this, okay? Please stay away from this nonsense. You might end up with citing some racist crap about like debunked or fraudulent studies, okay? Don't do this, okay? Stick to my stuff and stick, importantly, to when you do additional research, which again, we will work on in the seminar this week, to peer-reviewed journals, okay? Don't fall. Psychology Today is crap, okay? Don't go there at least go there very critically and assume that there's a really high chance that what they're writing is wrong, okay? So that's the first one, reinventing the wheel. Please use the lectures. Please use the articles I provide, the chapters, to get your content, to get a deeper understanding. Do not go to Psychology Today. I think I kind of set that point enough now. The other one is like lacking applications and applications lacking detail. One of the key things last year was that students often just forget to form applications. They talk about research that might be relevant, but forget to make applications to the problem, okay? So they don't use it to help find solutions for the problem that the company, that the university, that the government is coming to you to solve, okay? The other one is that often the translation really lack detail. We hammered this in last week's the week before in the Darth Vader exercise, right? And I will use some of the content that you guys sent in to highlight what can go wrong or how to do it better by using the stuff you sent in for the group work for the Darth Vader. Okay, the Darth Vader exercise. So here's an example. Okay, let's say you write about the Biddy University problem. You say people seem to form immediately impressions on the dimensions of warmth and competence. Morality might be the most important facet of warmth impressions. Okay, so you have written that. So you said like warmth is important, competence is important, and then you might and you highlight that morality plays a role. So now in your application, you need to highlight all three of them. Okay. Often one key problem is that then the student only talks about one of them, like the most obvious. Oh, then I talk about warmth. Okay. Not about competence, not about morality. Okay. The other one is like, this is a classic example of an application that's not really an application. Okay. So then it's like Darth Vader might want to present himself as warm, competent, especially highlighting his strong moral values. This is basically just this, what you said on the left with, that's what Darth Vader should do. It's unclear if you understand what this means in action. Okay. So this is not an application. This is basically just saying, oh, he should do that. Okay. So it's important that you do applications and the applications are concrete and specific and you translate these into action. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Okay. So last week we wanted to help Darth Vader, 2 weeks ago, sorry. We want to help Darth Vader win his student become a student representative and win his election, but he obviously suffers from the problem that a lot of people are scared of him. So here's like Girls and Sean, one of our groups, did an amazing job in their coursework, in their group work. Sorry, I always say coursework instead of group work. In their group work 2 weeks ago, really excellent job. And they started by highlighting the problems, right? And they made it specific. So they would say, first impressions are very quickly made, right? And they judge on warmth and moral character and then competence. Okay, so why is this a problem for this guy? Well, first his helmet blocks his facial cues. Okay, so oh, that's a problem. We have to do something about the helmet. Okay, good. And then his whole outfit is basically a walking representative heuristic. Here it is, representative heuristic of a movie villain. Right? So now we have kind of outlined why the research that we found is a problem for Darth Vader. And now we have to find a solution. So this is a great start for an application. Then here we have two other groups, Milgram's Confederates and Speedy Saba. Both of them first thought like, okay, how can we address the lack of problem of warmth? Okay, they realized, I think some actually did some research on that Darth Vader needs his mask in order to survive. So we can't just take off the mask. Also, the face underneath it is not very pleasant because he got burned. So they say like, oh, why can't we give him like a baby face, big eyes, and then we make it a smiley mask, right? And so this is the research they cite here, right? There's this kind of idea that if we are more attractive or if we have more baby-faced features, we are more likely to be perceived as warm and trustworthy, okay? And then they apply it, so like, oh, what we have to do is we have to change the mask, the helmet. There was the problem we identified earlier. Why don't we make the eyes bigger and like, I don't know, like a smaller nose? He doesn't really have a nose, and maybe make like his face resemble a smile, because this is what people associate with warmth. Okay. So this is a really good translation of the insights of the warmth stuff onto the course, onto the problem, right? Great application. But then often, and even last in the 2 weeks ago, like a lot of groups then stopped. Not sort of ultra social humans. It's like, okay, how can we do competence now? And then they highlight, okay, we need to present some information that highlights the competence of Darth Vader. And then they have these 4 different points, really good, where they highlight, okay, he's powerful with the Force. He's a military experienced leader. He's really good at doing these pod racing, and he was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Here's 4 bits of information that he should highlight in his campaign, because they all indicate good competence, right? So this is like specific applications of the idea of integrating competence into one's campaign. Very specific, very good. And then the winners, that's that's the name of the group, not the winners of that group exercise. They said like, okay, how can we use this kind of like the idea of the true self and highlight that he's actually behind the mask a really good moral character, right? We had warmth, competence, and especially this importance of morality. And here you can see like the light behind the dark, right? You can see, oh, he used to be his true self, right? This desire of us, taking advantage of this desire of us, of wanting to see that the true self of other people is something positive. They use that motivation. So like, oh, behind the mask, there's a good guy. Here we show you that, right? So they address that way the morality. So you have warmth, competence, and morality applied specifically to the problem of Darth Vader winning the student election. So whenever you do applications, think of Darth Vader. Think about the specific details and describe them, okay? Obviously, do not include any figures, pictures, etc., but describe them. Create them in your mind and then describe them. The third biggest problem is the curse of knowledge. A lot of you guys write to me as if it kind of like, oh, Andreas knows what I'm talking about. I don't have to explain that. That's obvious. And it is probably obvious, and I probably kind of understand it. But if I don't see it, then I don't understand it, okay? Or you're so deep into it that you're kind of like, I don't know, like cryptic sentences. And it's like, they must realize that I can't really understand what they're talking about, okay? This is my kind of recommendation, right? Is that you kind of use or assume in your head that you're not writing for me, but for somebody who is basically of the reports bright, but knows nothing about psychology. Okay, so there's another person, I think Yasmin in the session that I did not record last time, suggested that she always, as a student, wrote for another student that does not study psychology. Okay, maybe they study economics, and now you have to explain that to them. They're bright and they will understand it. I always suggest that you should write for your mother. She's intelligent, but hopefully most likely doesn't know anything about psychology. Even if she does, it's even better. But I think this is the level of explanations you have. Steven Pinker, here depicted on the right, really nicely writes about this, how this curse of knowledge often impedes how we communicate, because we think you know, I know, and it's really hard for me to kind of understand what you do not know. So write to another person that does not know anything about psychology, and ideally remember step 8 of my 8-step program for great marks. Give it to them, and then if they give you feedback and say like, I don't understand what cognitive dissonance is after reading your paragraph, then you need to get back to the drawing board and explain it better. So this is basically kind of like, yes, now okay. So this is like my tips, right? Try to not reinvent the wheel. Try not to use any crazy sources. You make sure you get the applications right, and try to imagine that the person who's reading it doesn't really know anything about psychology, and hence you need to explain things in detail. How to write something absolutely terrible. I think the biggest problem last year was plagiarism. I will not talk about plagiarism. I just want to highlight, like, if you submit it, there's a really good chance that you would get a high Turnitin score. I think you get your score when you submit something. And the reason, like, this is pretty common, okay? And the reason is that Turnitin basically first counts all your references, right? This is like, okay, it's like, it looks at all the text and says like, okay, here are all these references, and all of these references, pretty good references, by the way, all of these references are kind of like copied from somewhere else. Okay, that's what we call as plagiarism. But the person who marks it, Yasmin Konioai, we see that this is not plagiarism. The same is true for the kind of scenario. So I think if you have references in scenario marked as basically plagiarized, you will have already like a score of 30 or something. So do not worry about it. Just don't plagiarize and you'll be fine. And there's nothing you have to worry about. One thing I just want to highlight is like, one thing students often kind of are surprised by is like anything that's like, here you see submitted to Nanyang University, submitted to this university, to that research archive. So there's like Even if these are like submitted to other universities, Turnitin knows that and will detect plagiarism. Okay, it's basically impossible to plagiarize with Turnitin, so don't try to do that. Okay, I think don't try to be smarter. Sometimes students ask, "Oh, can I see whether I plagiarized or not?" Obviously, you can't. But just don't plagiarize. Okay, I said it now 12 times and I stopped saying it. Let me make this the last point and then we can talk for 10 minutes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about this. Which scenario, like if you write in your layout, there's an APA formatted sample paragraph that you can just use as your template, or you can use any of the course, like the group work we did. If I give you a Word document that's always in that format, for instance, this week's group work will be in this format. So I include the scenario, or at least the scenario number, that I know what you're talking about. Do not use abbreviations. Do not use bullet points or list. Do not quote verbatim. So if you say like, Capes defines confirmation bias, like quotation marks, what I wrote, quotation marks close, don't do that. That is not plagiarism, but I don't know whether you understand what you're talking about or not. It's bad writing to use quotes for anything. Okay, it's the same as it's bad writing to use abbreviations in 99% of the cases. Obviously, if your mother understands the abbreviation, then you can use the abbreviation. You can use UK and USA and US or something like that, right? But if your mother doesn't understand the abbreviation, you shouldn't. And there's no need, I think there's always a question, oh, you will not talk about one topic so often that you need to abbreviate it, okay? Abbreviations make the writing of the article easier for you. They make the reading harder. And your writing should be about the person who reads it, and you should care about that person and not about making life for yourself easier. So don't use quotes, don't use bullet points, abbreviations, don't use first names. There's no reason to ever include any first names unless I just don't. It's like, don't use figure and graphs, okay? I think these are like very obvious ones. You find all of them in the template. If you need to you're wondering how formatting works, here's a link to the APA style document, right? Very easy to do APA style. So there's really no reason to okay, don't use any different colors, fonts, sizes, none of that. Okay. You might be lucky and somebody else marks this, not me, but if I see a blue heading, I'm just I already want to quit. Okay. I will still mark you fairly, but it's just why did you do that? Ideally, you start with a short paragraph that summarizes everything you will talk about in your report. I strongly recommend making this a habit for everything you write, especially for coursework and job applications, right? Whenever you write something, have the first paragraph should summarize all your arguments. Most of the time, especially if you have job applications, other reports for other people, they do not have the time to read everything. So if you summarize in a good way everything in your first paragraph, then there's no need for them to further move on and they will give you the job. Okay. Oh, one last thing. I'm not sure why this is so complicated, but I think last year, basically, I don't know how few students got APA referencing, in-text referencing right. Here's I think 7 or 8 examples of what you should not do, right? So this is not APA. You see here my little comment APA, because this is not this should be deleted, right? What else? Okay, it's the same, in-text, right? Don't have this and don't have that. If you read journal articles, if you read textbooks, you will just by osmosis absorb the right way to cite, okay? Ash, okay, so this is something that actually strangely happens a lot, where people put a full stop and then the reference, sometimes no full stop, then again, or a full stop, but don't do that. The reference is within the sentence and not outside the sentence. Don't use ands. Okay, this is the and sign. Again, no initials in this. I mean, obviously, do not put the name of the article or anything like this in, right? So this here needs to be, obviously, there needs to be a space, but then all of this needs to go, okay? This is like the least interesting bit is to what is the name of the study, okay? Here we have Rosenberg, Nelson, okay? So this would be something you might have to do. I mean, this is the worst. This is if you read Psychology Today, then you end up writing like that. It's like psychologist Leslie Sebranes of Brandeis University studies the facial. That's just like, don't write like that. None of this is important. Okay. What her first name is, that she's a psychologist, and from which university does not have any impact on the quality of the research you're citing. Okay. That would be it for me. I think here's a little timeline. Okay. We released this Friday the scenarios. Then we have the submission deadline about 2 months later. 4 weeks later, you get your marks and feedback. And a week thereafter, you have a chance to chat with me, Connie, and Yasmin personally and get more feedback. Okay, I will stop my sharing here and see if anyone has questions. I have 10 minutes to, or I actually have only 5 minutes. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Can't quite remember what the question were on Monday. I think there was one about abbreviations. If I define theory of mind and then I call it TOM, can I use then TOM instead of theory of mind? Again, I would strongly recommend against that, but you could do that. I mean, I will not, it will not lower your mark. It just makes your writing less accessible. What were the other questions? I can't quite remember. Does anyone have a question today? Again? Maybe you remember you're back for a second session. I don't know. That seems unlikely. And you remember any of the questions? You can put them in a chat. If not, then I would just stop the recording here and wish you good luck for your coursework. And you guys see each other on Friday in the seminars where we continue to work on coursework relevant group work. This time on, thanks for the nice words in the chat, on additional research. I think it's really good. I think the group work, this work is really good. So stop by and talk to you soon.